I've been walking through the book of Matthew, and we're now at the Sermon on the Mount. We've come through the temptation of Jesus. He's called his disciples, and he's about to start his teaching ministry. His first ever recorded sermon is about to happen right now. And it says in verse 5, chapter 5, it says that when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up to the mountainside and he sat down, and his disciples came to him. And that's when he began to teach them. You see, what's interesting is that even before Jesus starts talking, he shows us something interesting about who he is and what's important to him. He sees the crowds and he goes the other way. He goes the opposite direction. And most pastors, politicians, celebrities, we run toward the crowds, right? Jesus goes the other way. He goes up the mountainside. Only his disciples come. So basically, his most famous sermon ever, right? The first words out of his mouth in his teaching ministry is only going to be to 12 people. If we had a church of 12 people, we'd shut it down. In our egocentric, sort of narcissistic world, we miss that entire part of his first message, and it is to some extent his entire message. Jesus is small. He is not about what we think he should be about. He's not about the things that we think might be important or matter. To some extent, to a great extent, he's kind of the opposite of all of that. So even before he begins to speak his first words in his first sermon, his first part of his teaching ministry, he's already serving up a warning to us that what you value in this world, I turn away from. What you value in this world, I turn away from. I'm about to spin your mind, people. He says, I see things differently than you do. So the first words of Jesus' first sermon are about to come out of his mouth. Are they going to be about how great he is, how he's supposed to be worshiped, how he's the Son of God? Are they going to be any of that stuff? Is he going to insist that people accept him in their hearts as their Lord and Savior so that they'll, be able to get to heaven when they're dead? All the stuff that we think is pretty cool in the church today? It seems like those would be his first words, wouldn't they? Nope. That's all the stuff that we want to hear from Jesus. What seems to be top on Jesus' mind for his first sermon ever, his most famous sermon ever, is some degree of blowing our minds. He wants to reorient our entire mindset around how we interact with people and how we engage with the idea of suffering and how we engage with the idea of sacrifice for others. For some reason, in this exact moment, this seems to be the important thing, the thing front and center on the mind of Jesus right now. And it's not going to be where we're going to go when we're dead. It's about what we're going to do and how we're going to be while we are alive. So the first words out of his mouth are mind-blowing. It may not feel mind-blowing to us anymore because, especially if you've heard the Sermon on the Mount 8 million times, we kind of let it roll off our back. But he says this, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, the original word in the Greek language for blessed was mostly used the same way we use it today. That it reflected some degree of sort of outward prosperity. You were rich. You had a lot of stuff. You had great health. You had a lot of friends and family and properties and things that you were just blessed, right? It meant you had good stuff, and good stuff kept coming to you. That's what blessed meant then, and it's how we use the word today. And Jesus said, let's put the brakes on that. Because in the kingdom of heaven, that may not be what it means. In Jesus' world, he says, blessed is not what you think. Blessed is this, those poor in spirit. Now, if you happen to be somebody who considers yourself to be poor in spirit, this idea probably shocks you because you may not be feeling all that blessed, if you know what I mean. Maybe, in fact, this idea shocks you the most when you are suffering, when you are literally poor in spirit. Perhaps this idea is most shocking to you. And it gets even more interesting because the word poor in the original language wasn't necessarily that you didn't have money or whatever, even though I'm sure that aggravated the situation. But the idea of being poor meant you were in this, of how you positioned yourself in the world. And it really had to do with being positioned as a beggar. You were in this sort of beggarly, crouching position. That's what it meant. That's what poverty meant. That's what poor meant in this context. To be in a beggarly, sort of crouching position, as if your existence relied on somebody doing something for you. Blessed is that person. Specifically, the one poor in spirit. And this word spirit also had a very unique meaning to that context back then. There were no medical doctors as we know them today. Science was not what it was today. And a lot of times philosophy and science and medicine all sort of melded together. And they were trying to understand how the human body worked, how it continued to function in the world, what was the secret sauce that sort of kept it all together, And they thought it must be air. It must be pneuma, they called it. And that is the word translated spirit. So this thing called the spirit, pneuma, air, is what allowed the body, the mind, and the heart to connect, and all the fibers and beings. It really, the pneuma, the air is what allowed the whole human being to function scientifically, metabolically. That's how they understood it. So basically, if you are one who is poor in spirit, you are one who is literally a person crouched and begging for the air, the substance needed to maintain your life function. That you simply were starving for air, begging for air, so that you can continue to function in the world. This is the person. This is the person. This is what blessed looks like to Jesus. And the people who originally, these 12 disciples, that wasn't the crowd, remember? These 12 people must have been going, what? This is what you think is blessed? We kind of want cool jobs and positions of authority, and we want stuff and things. You know what I'm saying? This is blessed. What are you talking? This is not blessed. This looks like suffering is what this looks like. This looks like barely existing, begging for your daily sustenance to be alive. And Jesus says, yeah, not only is that blessed in my eyes, but I'll go one step further. Jesus says, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And he's not saying some future tense that these people are all going to be going to heaven when they're dead. He's saying it's theirs. It's right now. It's right now. It's a perfect possessive pronoun. Theirs. They own it. They own the kingdom of heaven. This is mind-blowing. This is mind-blowing, not only, to some extent for those of us who think blessed means the fact that we have a nice house, that we do get fed every day, that we have all the good stuff, but it's mostly mind-blowing to those who are barely struggling to survive. This, to you, Jesus said, that's blessed, and this cannot be anything but a shock to our system. And Jesus goes on to talk about suffering and sacrifice. That's what blessedness looks like. Blessed are those who are mourning, he said. Blessed are those who mourn, who grieve. This doesn't feel like a blessing. Blessed are the meek. Are you kidding me? There is nothing in our culture that supposes that meekness is a virtue. And Jesus goes one step further with those who are meek. He says, For they will inherit the earth. And we think the opposite, right? We think if you're meek, you're going to get run over. You're going to get trampled on. You're not going to end up with any of the good stuff. Everybody's going to take it all for theirs. And Jesus says opposite is going to happen. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. It will all be theirs. Everything that we're all glomming onto today in our aggression, in our fight for stuff, Jesus says it's not going to be yours. This is opposite of how we think. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. He doesn't say, blessed are you who impart your righteousness on other people, by the way. But blessed are those who hunger and thirst. By the way, hunger and thirst are the most driving forces in the human physiology. To be thirsty for something means that you cannot survive without, in your mind and your body is saying, I cannot live another day without righteousness. Talk about blessed are the merciful. That's sacrifice. Blessed are the merciful. Who is that today? Who is that today? Blessed are the merciful, those who show mercy, those who let people get away with something, those who offer of their own self so that somebody else might have something, might get away with something. This is not how we function today. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Blessed are you when people insult you, when they persecute you, when they falsely say all kinds of things about you, because what's happening to you is exactly what happened to me, he said. Do you remember that? He said. They wouldn't know it then, but he would be foreshadowing what's actually going to happen to him. And he says, when all those things happen, when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of things about you, he says, don't defend yourself. In fact, Jesus would later show he didn't defend himself. But he said, instead do this, rejoice. Don't get all upset that you're not being treated fairly, or that life's not fair, or that people are being mean to you. Politicians. Instead, rejoice and be glad. This is not a world that functions the way we think it's supposed to function. And these are the first words out of Jesus' mouth to help us understand that what we think blessing means, what we think it means to be blessed, to be blessed, is not what we think it means. Jesus kicks off his entire teaching ministry by saying, the way you function is not the way things function. And then, he's going to spend the rest of his life living this reality, living the life of the merciful, living the life of the meek. Then Jesus begins to actually embody his entire teaching to show people physically, this is what my teaching actually looks like when it's embodied in a human being. And blessed does not mean wealth. It doesn't mean health. It doesn't mean kids, grandkids, jobs. It doesn't mean retirement, land, cars, RVs, vacations. It doesn't mean, none of that's included. In fact, it appears as though the opposite is what's included. This is how Jesus starts his ministry. He starts his ministry by blowing our minds, by saying the way that we see suffering and sacrifice is not the way he sees suffering and sacrifice. That these two things, suffering and sacrifice, are the principal building blocks of what he calls the kingdom of heaven. And that what's foremost on his mind are those who are meek, those poor in spirit, the merciful. those who are being falsely persecuted. The first people on his mind are those who are approaching life right now, begging, crouching and begging for whatever it means for them to be able to continue to have function in this world. This, says Jesus, is what's first on my mind. And maybe what he's saying is, you, even though it doesn't feel that way, you may be who is first.